You know, so I'm like really scared, like really scared. And in some places, there are just no guardrails at all. And you got the crazy person tailgating you, trying to make you go faster, and passing you at a place where they shouldn't be passing. So I coped with that fear by first avoiding the mountains just altogether. But then I quickly realized if I wanted to live in Washington State and get around, I would need to figure out a way to navigate in those mountains. So then I would go around the mountains, which ended up taking a little bit longer. Sometimes I would go like through the mountains, but then I hated those tunnels and stuff, so that wasn't working for me either. So one day I decided, okay, I'm gonna go drive to near the top of one of these mountains, well, as far to the top as I could go, and that was Mount Rainier. And I actually did that one day, and at about 5,400 feet, the elevation, there's a nice place appropriately called Paradise. And I stood there, and it was just an amazing sight. Now, what does all of this have to do with trauma and recovery? Well, what it does have to do with that is that domestic violence, sexual assault, all forms of trauma, what I've learned is that we often deal with it by avoiding it, avoiding the harasser, the victimizer, the abuser, the situation, the memories. But I needed to deal with Dr. Pervert if I was going to get my degree. So a lot of us deal with trauma by going around it. So I tried that, reporting him to his boss, and to no avail. Then I tried to go through him by filing a grievance and filing a lawsuit, and that helped. And finally getting my degree made me feel like I was standing on top of the mountain, and I had recovered in some ways. But have you ever felt like there was unfinished business, though? Now, the trauma of graduate school didn't dominate my life in the same way, and it didn't shape my personal identity in the same way, but I felt like there was unfinished business. And when I stood at the top of Mount Rainier, I realized I could see all of the Cascade Mountain range, and that there was so much more out there in terms of recovery. So that moved me to healing, actually. And so healing for me, and I think for other survivors, is when we wake up one day and we realize that time is what makes up our lives. It's seconds, minutes, hours, days, weeks, months, years. And you wake up one day and you realize, I've given this harasser or victimizer 1,000 of my yesterdays. And I'm not giving him my tomorrow. The future starts today, and the rest of it belongs to me. Healing for me meant acknowledging the major changes that trauma creates in our lives. And I really learned that lesson when I went to Mount St. Helens. And this mountain is famous for this catastrophic eruption on May 18th, 1980. At about 8:32 a.m., it was the deadliest and most economically destructive volcanic event in the history of the United States. 57 people were killed, 250 homes were just destroyed, 47 bridges, 15 miles of railway, 185 miles of highway, and more than 7,000 animals were killed, bears, elk, deer, and nearly 230 square miles of forest, and was just blown down and buried beneath this volcanic ash. And at the same time, this mushroom cloud-shaped column of ash rose thousands of feet skyward and then drifted downward. And it just turned day into night as it fell all over eastern Washington and beyond. And the eruption lasted 9 hours, and Mount St. Helens and the surrounding area was changed forever, dramatically in those few hours. Well, sexual assault and domestic violence works a lot like that. One incident that maybe only lasted a few minutes can really shape the rest of your life. It changes you when you're attacked inside your own body. But But Mount St. Helens also taught me that there's still life in the middle of ruins. Plants lived, and smaller animals would feed on those plants, and the dead leaves provided fertilizer. And then slowly, life started to form again, and birds flew over and they dropped seeds, and those seeds took root. And the important lesson here is that I can never really write myself off. That there's a reason sometimes for destruction. What looks like a natural disaster is really an opportunity for rebirth and regrowth. And that there's really beauty, even in those burned and twisted trees. And the same really applied to me and many of the other survivors that I knew, that this kind of violence and trauma doesn't destroy you. It changes you, but it doesn't destroy you. And finally, healing for me meant that you start to realize that life goes on beyond trauma, that there's still a whole big world out there to explore and to experience, and you can still find your place in it. I can either stay on the ground and be really small, and that would be my life, or that I can go out and see what was out there. I suppose you could also hold on to that pain and hurt, and I tried that too, and it didn't really work very well. But ultimately for me, healing from trauma really meant jumping into life. I mean, literally jumping into life. Facing our greatest fears, stepping out on faith, even when you're really afraid, especially when you're really afraid, like at 13,500 feet. And trusting that somehow, someday, some way, that you'll land okay. Thank you.